what we want to do is I want to do this small project here on how to create an endpoint. So from our diagram, we have our availability zone, we have our VPC, we have an instance. Basically, it is within the subnet in this particular VPC. Now we're creating an endpoint. Now, as we said, anything outside of your VPC, this instance sees it as an entity that is outside. Now we know about permissions in AWS. Everything outside of the VPC, basically I need permission. So we will have to assign some permissions to our endpoint so that it can do it. It can access the S3 bucket. But also after we've done that, we will try and put a policy on our bucket, like a bucket policy, which is a resource-based policy. We will try and put a policy so that we try and see where is this traffic actually coming from. Is it coming from the internet or it's coming through our endpoint? So that is that is our basic diagram. So right now we already have our VPC and we have our instance inside of our public subnet. So what we need now to create is I also have an S3 bucket created. So what we need is now to see how we can create this endpoint and what permission does it need. So if I go back to my to my AWS, okay, my VPC, let me just close this. Let me go back to my VPC. My VPC. My VPC right here. I can go back to this. This is a default VPC, so that is my VPC. So I can go back to that, my test VPC. So within that test VPC, I can create an endpoint. Okay? So you can go and create an endpoint. So this endpoint, what you're doing, you can give it a name. I can say my test endpoint. Right now, how would we want, or what we want this endpoint to be used by? So we're going to choose it is an AWS service. What service? We want, once we select AWS, we want an S3. We want an S3 service to be used because we want to make calls to S3. Now, for that, you can have different options. You can either have S3 global access. Do we want it to be a global access? Or do we just want it from only an access point in our region, US West? So we can just create in our region, that is US West 2. So that is the service. But now we need to create it as a gateway. Okay? So make sure you're selecting, you need to create that service here as a gateway. So we select that, but on what VPC? So we have to create, we are trying to create a VPC endpoint. So we need to select what VPC. So I'll go here and it is this VPC, okay? That is the VPC. Now, once you do that, then it brings you the route table, okay? It brings you the route table. We have a route table, that subnet that has been associated with this route table. Now, we want to make sure that we put a route in the table. We want to modify or edit our route table. Now, if you just select that, it is going to automatically put that route, right? Put that route in the route table, meaning any route from the VPC endpoint, it is going to do that. Then the policy, you have certain permissions that you can give it. So right now, because we have selected S3, let's just give it S3 full access. It allows the use of the service within the VPC using credentials, Amazon Web Services, right? So we need to give it a policy, and that is the policy, the permission. We're giving that permission to our endpoint right here. So I will leave it at full access. Then if you want, you can give it a tag, and then just create an endpoint. So once the endpoint is created, you can look at your route tables. So now this is my route table. If I go to my route table, this is your S3, right? An address for an S3, but the target is this VPC endpoint. So we've had a route. A route has been added to our route table that is directing traffic towards our VPC endpoint. Okay. Now, once we have that in our route table, now we have our instance. We have our EC2 instance. So again, let me just duplicate this and go to my EC2. Go to my EC2, right? We have our EC2 instance. This EC2 instance, I can connect to this instance. And again, I can just use InstaConnect, EC2 instance connect. Once I go to this instance, I can run some AWS commands, right? I can do AWS S3. I want LS. I want to list buckets, AWS S3 LS. So once I try to do that, it says it's unable to locate credentials. Now this S3, it is trying to do it. This EC2 instance, it is trying to make a call to S3, but S3, EC2 itself does not have permission to do it. It does not have permission to list any bucket. So for us to give it permission, we will go to IAM, right? We will go to IAM. So I can create a role. So there are two ways I can do it. So I can go to my instance, go to actions, then I can go to to security, okay, security, then I can modify a role. So these are permission. When we be talking about IAM roles, you guys will have more understanding. But I can give permission to this instance. So I can click on modify a role. I can either choose a role if I have any role, or I can create a new role. So I can create a new role. It is going to take me to the IAM console, right? Then I can say I want to create a role. A role will be used by a service, right? Choose the service. I can just say EC2. It is going to be used by EC2. The next, what kind of role do I want or permission? So I can search for S3. I need S3. Then I can give it S3 full access, right? I can say S3 because I just want my EC2 to make calls to S3. So I can say S3 full access. I can say next. And then now this will basically be the policy. So that instance will be able to use that role and this is the permission, right? I can create the role, but I need to give it a name. I will say my tests EC2 S3 role. So I can do that. Then I can say create role. So I have that role created. If I search for role test EC2, that is the role. Okay. Now I can go back now to my instance, modify a role, and now I can choose a role. This is the role that I just created. Now I can update. Update. Now this instance now, it has been given permission. It has full permission to do anything on S3. So if I go back to my Insta Connect and I will run the same command, AWS ls, right? Now I see it is listing for me two buckets. I have two buckets that it's basically listing for me this. It's listing for me these two buckets. Now let me go to my buckets. Okay, well, let me go to S3. S3, I have this bucket here, right? This bucket. Let me upload a file. Upload a file. I can do add a file, and I can do desktop. Do I have any file? I can open it. Right. Then I can upload. I can upload. Once I've uploaded that instance, I can go back here. Now I can try to, what is the name of my bucket? The name of my bucket is this. Copy that name. I can do AWS S3 ls. But what do I want to ls? I want to ls S3. I want to list the contents of that bucket. That's the name of the bucket. I want to list the contents. So once I do that, I see that there is a file inside it. Okay, there is a file. There's a file that I have inside of that bucket that I can list. Now, but how do we know whether this traffic is going through the internet or it's going through the VPC endpoint? Okay, so with that, let's go back to our our endpoint. So I can go back to our endpoint. I have one endpoint right here. Let's go to our policy. Now, this policy, it is allowing every principal, all actions, or all resources. So let's edit this policy and let's put here deny. Okay, let's put deny, and let's save that. So now our VPC endpoint, we've put there a deny policy. Let's go back to our instance and let's run the same commands. Can we do svls? So now we see here we have an error card, access denied when calling list buckets. Okay, let's run that command. So an error card. Why? So from our access point, we've now put a policy that is denying anything from going through it. So now here we confirm that our instance is making a call to S3 through that endpoint. So let me go back here. Let me go back to my policy. Let me edit the policy that we had put full access, and let me put it back to allow. Okay, so I can save it. Now this policy is allowing. Let me go back to my instance connect and let me try and now do a call. Now we see that it is making a call through that VPC endpoint. Okay. Now with that, we can modify the bucket. So let's go to our bucket, because this bucket, when we look at the bucket configuration, look at the bucket, that particular bucket, we look at permissions, it is blocking all public policy, but it doesn't have any bucket policy, right? So now what we want to do is we want to be able to add a policy on this such that it is only allowing traffic from the endpoint and not anywhere else. So, but before we do that, before we put that particular policy, let's Let me try and see if I can reach that bucket from the internet. Okay, from the internet. So I will do right now. If I just run AWS S3 LS, it is returning these buckets which are in the default account. Okay, the default account. But right now, when I look at my organizations, what that is returning, it is returning buckets in this account. But I'm working in the staging environment, and this is what you guys will be doing. So for you to be able to access staging environment on the command line, I will show you how to create organization. So what you do is once you come to this staging environment, you want to get the credentials, right? The credentials. So with these credentials, I'm going to copy this access key. It generates for you environmental variables. These are variables that are best for that particular account. So I'm going to copy that. Then with that, I'll come to my terminal. Again, remember, that's your terminal, that's your session. Then you will drop those credentials in your terminal like that. Okay. Once you drop them there, enter. Now these credentials are only available in this terminal. If I close this terminal or I start another terminal, I won't find these credentials. Okay. So that is something you have to pay attention, especially at work when you are testing for different accounts. You will go to your organization, get credentials, drop them here. You are exporting them, but they will be available for this particular session. Okay. Available for this particular session. Now, once I've done that, now I can run my command, right? I can now run my command. So let me do this. I can run my S3 LS. So if I LS, now the credentials that are there are for a different account, my staging account. And that's why I can see these buckets, right? Though the bucket has public access blocked, but because of my credentials, I'm the owner. It is giving me that pre-signed URL and I'm able to access these buckets. Can I list the contents in this bucket? So I can copy that, then I can run the command ls, and I can do S3, and I can paste this right there. Once I list, oh, it's giving me a non-option, so there's no space. No space. Right. So I see that I'm able to list that. So right here, I'm accessing that bucket from the internet. Okay. But if I go to my InstaConnect, EC2 Insta, I'm accessing it because I'm inside of the VPC, inside of the account. So I'm accessing the bucket through the VPC endpoint. Now let's put a policy on our bucket so that it only allows traffic from the endpoint and not from the internet. Now this is security. So you as a DevOps engineer, you are configuring all this so that I don't want anybody sitting on the internet to access my bucket, but only it is the instance only that is able to access that bucket, but through the VPC endpoint. So how can we do that? So I'll go back to my bucket. So let me move this one away. I'll go back to my bucket. And now what I need to copy first is my VPC endpoint. So I need to copy this VPC endpoint ID. Okay. Then I'll go back to my bucket, and now I need a bucket policy. So for this bucket policy, I can edit it, and I can use a policy generator. What type of policy? It is a bucket policy. So I'll do an S3 bucket policy. What is the effect? I want to deny, right? I want to deny, right? The principle, it is all subjects. It is an Amazon S3 service, right? S3 service, all actions. I want to deny, actually I need the bucket ARN. So before that, let me copy this bucket ARN and I can put this bucket ARN here, okay? And I just don't want that bucket ARN. I want, let's say, everything in the bucket. I want even the contents in the bucket, but I can put multiple separated by a comma. So I can put first the bucket, but right now I'll just leave the contents of the bucket. Then once you've done that, you now add a condition. So what is the condition? The condition, I want a string. If the string is not equal to string, I'll look for the condition, string not equals AWS source VPC, right? Source VPCE, that is VPC endpoint. If the source is not VPC endpoint, and what is the value? What is the value of that endpoint? The value is if it is not coming from this, if it's not coming from this endpoint, right? If it's not coming from that endpoint, then I want it to be denied. I want the access to be denied. So with that, I can add the condition. Strings not equal to, okay, I just need to add the statement. I need to add that particular statement. So all principles, effect is deny all S3 actions. This is the bucket. That is a bucket, but I've put a condition. If the source VPC is not this, then the effect is deny. So I can generate the policy. So once you generate that policy, then basically this is the condition. Okay. So I can again copy that policy, copy it as it is, go back to edit bucket policy, and now test, right? Test there. I can put a list here. I can put a list here using those square brackets. I can put that. Then I can also I can copy the same thing. I want both the bucket and the content. So I can put the bucket, the bucket and the content. And then I can close that. Close that. Then comma. Comma. So now I have, this is my policy, my bucket policy. Actions, all S3, effect is deny. Deny everything if the string is not equal to that source VPC endpoint, and that is the value. Okay. So once you've done that, you can now save the changes. You say you do not have permission to view the block bucket setting configuration. You have no permission. Okay. So this is good. So what has happened is that I'm trying to access that particular bucket from the console. And that's why it is telling me I have no permission. So already this is working. I have no permission because you can only access it from the endpoint, okay, not from the console because of the policy that has been applied. Now I can go to my InstaConnect and can I list? Yes, I can do that. Can I list the objects? I can still access that bucket. Now I can go to on the internet now. Can I list the bucket? If I go on the internet, can I list the bucket? I can list the buckets, right? I can list the buckets. Now, can I view the contents of that particular bucket? So if I do that and I try to view the content, then now I'm going to get access denied, like an error card access denied by calling that. Why? Because now I have a bucket policy, plus a bucket policy that now prevents anybody from the internet from doing what? From accessing that bucket. And no traffic can access that bucket apart from what is coming from the VPC endpoint. Okay. So this is basically how now you can use a VPC endpoint for security. Okay. For security. So you'll not be able to see the content of the bucket from the console. And if I went to the console, and I went to properties, I do not have permission to view that. If I went back to my bucket and I went to my bucket, right, I do not have permission to see that because this call is not coming from the VPC endpoint.